So continuing on with a little bit more information about the Epistle to the Laodiceans and some of the information relating to that. Of course, there is other non-canonical works that made their way at times into early writings. The Codex Sinaiticus includes the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermes, and which fell out of favor in the church in general. And I want you to say, once again, I am in no way arguing for these books to be part of the canon. I'm just historically sharing what I know and understand about them. In the Epistle to the Laodiceans, this is what Metzger has to say. In the middle of the ages of the church in the West received the Latin New Testament in the form that Jerome had given to it, and the subject of the canon was seldom discussed. At the same time, however, we find a certain elasticity in the boundaries of the New Testament. This is shown by the presence of the Epistle of Paul to the Laodiceans in more than 100 manuscripts of the Latin Vulgate, including the oldest, the celebrated Codex Fuldensis, AD 546, as well as the manuscripts in early and I'm going to butcher these names, the Albigensian, the Bohemians, the English, and the Flemish versions. Occasionally, the subject emerges in the discussion of the Pauline epistles. At the close of the 10th century, Alfric, a monk in Dorset, wrote in a treaty to Anglo-Saxon on the Old and New Testaments in which he states that the Apostle Paul wrote 15 epistles. In his enumerations of them, he places Laodicean after Philemon. About AD 1165, John of Salisbury, writing about the canon to Henry, Count of Champagne, acknowledges that it is the common, indeed almost universal opinion that there are only 14 epistles of Paul, but the 15th is that which is written to the church of the Laodiceans. The Epistle to the Laodiceans is included in all 18 German Bibles printed prior to Luther's translation, beginning with the first German Bible issued by Johann Mentel at Strasbourg in 1488. In these, the Pauline epistles, with the Epistle to the Hebrews, immediately follows the Gospels, with Laodiceans standing between Galatians and Ephesians. In the first Czech Bohemian Bible, published at Prague in 1488 and reprinted several times in the 16th and 17th centuries, Laodiceans follows Colossians and precedes 1 Thessalonians. Thus, Bishop Lightfoot phrases it, for more than 9 centuries, this forged epistle hovered about the doors of the sacred canon, without either finding admission or being peremptorily excluded. It was not until the Council of Florence in 1439 to 1443 that the See of Rome delivered for the first time a categorical opinion on the scriptural canon, in consequence of the efforts made by the council to bring about reunion with the Eastern Orthodox Church, which sought support. And so it was finally about this time that they began to list the 27 books of the New Testament that the West folks over in Europe began to finally exclude the Epistle to the Laodiceans. So some interesting background on that epistle. And as I said, that was a forgery. I just find it interesting to try to look at back in the day, probably some 20, 25 years ago when I really jumped into this study of the canon. And once again, I pretty much have concluded that the 66 books are what I go with. I've not ever argued for any additional books, and I've always encouraged students that have asked me, I've said, if you haven't read the 66 books that are agreed upon by virtually all, then don't worry about these other books. They're secondary, and I certainly place them in that category, and certainly some like this that are proven to be a forgery. And so anyway, but it's fascinating, interesting history to know and understand.